Tonight's theme is going to be Women in Business, Managing Change with a Growth Mindset. So I'm Wenya Kawesha. I work at an artificial intelligence startup called Faculty AI. And prior to this, was in the strategy team at Accenture, and then also worked for the Clintons in New York quite some time ago. And with me is Karen PELHAM. Karen, can you give us a wave?
Hello.
Hello, Karen. So Karen has an incredibly impressive career. She's had more than 30 years worth of leadership experience, and she's worked in New York, Frankfurt, London. Hope I'm not missing any locations out. And then after completing her MBA at Kellogg, Karen started her career in Goldman Sachs in the Treasury division, and has spent the majority of her illustrious career in technology. She's most recently been a consultant at the software business Endeavor, and she's also on the council of the Maturity Institute, and she's London-based.
Thank you.
Welcome, Karen. And then I also have Katie Dash with me. Katie, can you give us a wave? Thank you. So Katie is head of the Everyone's Business campaign at the Confederation of British Industry, and she is also a trustee of the Black Cultural Archives, so very much at the forefront in terms of business trends, business leadership, and themes. So very pleased to have both of you with us tonight.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to start off, and the way we're going to do this is we've got a couple of questions directly for Karen about her career and her journey, a couple of questions directly for Katie and her career and her journey, and then some more general questions that both please feel free to chip into. And then we'll also leave some times for questions at the end. So if you have any, please type these in the chat, and then we will get to those towards the end as well. Okay, great. So let's start with you, Karen. You've had an incredibly impressive and varied career, and you entered the workforce as a pioneer in the 80s. So can you share with us some information about what it's been like and what have been the big changes you've seen and the big themes in each of the decades in which you've worked?
Oh, thank you. I mean, these numbers are starting to sound huge. When I think about 30 years of work, it doesn't feel like it's been 30 years, and I think that's probably good and bad in many ways. If I think about the 80s, that was at a time of a lot of growth. The financial markets were changing. You had companies who had great ambitions. They were hiring directly from Wall Street in great numbers. I think if I recall, our class was probably the largest that went to Wall Street that year. It was when GE was buying Peter Peabody because they were believing that big conglomerate organizations could actually manage well the investment banking and the market-driven businesses. And so they were really growing and expanding. If you look in terms of the 90s, that was when the growth started to go global. And I think whereas in the 80s, we were looking at things that were starting to improve the ability of the business to scale. You were using technology to maybe automate more processes. You were just starting, I think, in the very early days. I mean, I can still remember when things were being done in writing things out in paper, in 4 pieces of paper, splitting them up and handing them to a runner. So that tells you how far the market's gone when you think about what they're doing today. I think in the 90s, again, as I mentioned, it was global. But at that point, we were also starting to expand to be able to really look at the world. It required more diversity. I think for many of the women or people who were not part of the dominant culture, a lot of time was spent trying to learn how to fit in, which maybe meant that you were working away from your natural tendencies, but it was important to figure out how you could fit in with more of the dominant personalities within the organization. If we think about that going global, things are very different. My time in Germany showed me that you needed to leave your mindset kind of at the base of the building, and you had to really adjust it as you went upstairs. Moving on, you talked about the year 2000. I'm thinking back, that was September 11th, 2001. We had the dot-com bubble. It was a real retrenchment for business, and that required a different mindset. Rather than growing, it was trying to figure out how to cut costs, how to be able to shrink the business, and that was a really difficult time for the market. But then you started to see, I think in the 2010s, you started to see tech really take off. That was my feeling. And that you were looking at things as no longer trying to cut costs, but you were looking for new opportunities. You were looking for disruption. You were looking for innovation. Agile became this big new term, but actually agile meant being responding to new information and testing hypotheses, which might have been what we were doing back in the day when things moved more slowly. And so now here we are in 2020, and the world has changed yet again. I think we've got a lot more technology and things in place to be able to deal with it, but it's going back right now to very much being the issues for humanity.
Mm.
So
that's really fascinating.
Cover the range?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I suppose, were there a lot of women who started with you when you started your career, and also maybe throughout? Did women start to drop off at certain points?
Yes. I think there were women who joined with me. There were very phenomenal women already working in the business, but what you saw over the years was the pressures for women who wanted to have their families. You saw for maybe women who wanted to strike out on their own. So you did actually start to see maybe the pipeline start to become a little quieter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And have you managed to keep in touch with any of the colleagues that you've worked for say 10, 20, 30 years potentially?
I have, and that's one of the gifts I think of this experience.
Amazing.
Is that there's been an incredible assortment of women and men who I've met along the way who have really made life very rich. I think I've also seen them succeed and do many interesting things. And I think the one thing that if we're thinking about, about why was that possible, I think for all of them, I saw them having the courage of their convictions. I think they were willing to have their convictions challenged. And I think that they were willing to take risks when they needed to. And they've done very well. It's a really interesting group of people. And it covers the range too. There's people who've gone into government. There's people who started their own funds. There's people who've actually, sort of become public servants. And then also there's a lot of people who become really great moms.
Amazing. That sounds amazing. And so a couple of quick questions for Katie before we start to move on to some of the more general questions. So you work at CBI, which is definitely an authority when it comes to British industry, and you've been working on the Everyone's Business campaign. And we understand that you have a report for clients. Are there any highlights you can share on business that could be interesting and helpful for the audience?
Yeah, of course. What I'll do is maybe just give a quick background on the CBI and then on the campaign, and then lead on to the report just to build that chain. So the CBI is a business membership organisation. We represent around 190,000 businesses in the UK, which is really around 7 million people employed. So that's about a third of the private sector workforce in the UK. And our purpose is to help our clients, or our members as we call them, create a prosperous society for all. So not just themselves, but the societies that they operate in. So we do this through a number of measures. One of them is campaigning. There is kind of the traditional lobbying work, so engagement with government. We also do a lot of kind of business to business or B2B insight things like events, conferences, etc. So my area of work is called Everyone's Business, and it's essentially our responsible business campaign. And I've been running that for a little while now. And that purpose is to really help our members ensure they have the tools in place to demonstrate their value to society. One of the key outputs from that campaign is a reputation tracker that we've been running for about 3 years now, called the Everyone's Business Reputation Tracker. There's a trend there. And our latest report, which was published in August, had 3 key findings for business who are looking to demonstrate their responsibility agenda. The first one is around how you treat your employees is key for being a responsible business. So just to give a bit of a data insight, The public who we survey for the report, we survey about 2,000 members of the public, a representative sample of the UK population. Their views towards the business community always underpaces that towards their employer as a whole. So just to give some statistics, this year 84% of respondents said that their relationship with their employer is positive, which is good. However, 50% of the same group of responses said that they thought the reputation of business as a whole was good. So there is definitely a difference between how people feel about their employers versus how they feel about business as a whole.
Yeah.
The second key finding is around purpose, which is a big theme at the moment in terms of corporate purpose being quite key for businesses to build in, to get trust and confidence, and empowering your best advocates. So again, back to the employee point, not everyone wants to hear from this grand CEO, and they're more likely to resonate with someone who works on the ground in a business to talk about what they actually do.
That sounds great. And have you, your organization, done any research or got any statistics around the various basically challenges in the workplace, whether it's, pay gaps or challenges around sort of harassment, controversies around those topics?
Yeah. So our Everyone's Business campaign is more high level than that, but we have a dedicated function around people and skills through which we kind of assess and do research on those particular matters. So on sexual harassment, for instance, we're quite clear that, illegal, but unfortunately it still happens, whether in the workplace or not. So the government recently closed a consultation on this around whether it needs to go further in legislation to action sexual harassment in the workplace. And the CBI has been very supportive of a kind of new duty for employers to ensure that they are taking more proactive, reasonable steps to ensure that they are minimizing sexual harassment in the workplace as much as possible. So that recently closed. We're also supporting the reintroduction of, I think it's Section 40 of the Equality Act, around kind of third-party sexual harassment. So, for example, if you send your employees to a client event and they experience such sexual harassment by someone at their event, to ensure there's some kind of liability there for employers. On the gender pay gap, again, the CBI were quite supportive of mandatory reporting on the gender pay gap, both on gender and ethnicity for that matter. We think transparency is key to ensure that there is progress and catalyzing change. I think employers need to be given the freedom to demonstrate the different ways that they are doing that. So I think there are some employers who are looking to set themselves ambitious targets, and there are employers who on top of that are kind of working with women in STEM, for instance, to support the pipeline from quite early on. And those are measures that are going to be taking some time. We've produced a report called Mind the Gap last year, and this year we produced Bridge the Gap on ethnicity pay gaps to help share best practice of what employers are doing to tackle. And I can talk about some of those actions if helpful.
That's great. I mean, you're welcome to elaborate now, or happy to, if you want to put that in throughout some of your answers in the rest of the session.
Okay, I guess just to on gender, and I'll quickly touch on ethnicity pay gaps. Data, I think, is key in terms of kind of assessing where you are at the moment and the areas where you need to kind of tackle action. There's also kind of improving your retention and recruitment policies, particularly towards women and ethnic minorities for that matter, on ethnicity pay gaps, to help kind of tackle some of the challenges. Leadership is key, and that's from the top down. We hear a lot about kind of sponsors in the workplace, but it's important that their remit's not just focused on the kind of current employee situation, but on those attraction and retention issues too. And communication, I think, is also key to demonstrate momentum among your employees. Then additionally on ethnicity, there is building that culture of inclusion and trust in the workplace and making race comfortable to talk about in the workplace, and that also applies for gender in some sectors and industries too.
That's amazing. Thank you both for that. So it'd be great now to basically ask you both more general questions, and feel free to jump in with answers as you please. We've got quite a range of things here, but it may be good, considering all the news, to start with, your thoughts, reflections on the sort of crisis we have around the corona pandemic, and, the impact for business, people worrying about their careers, livelihoods, etc.
Should I kick off?
Sure.
I guess from a CBI point of view, COVID-19 is really kind of front of mind for all our members at the moment. And in fact, in terms of what we're doing as a day job, my job is kind of shifting to help the company deal with that. I think that the main thing that has been from the get-go is the people aspect of it. So one, the practicality of ensuring people are able to work from home. I think a lot of us are kind of working from home at the moment, ensuring they've got the practical tools and steps. The other thing we're putting the emphasis on is around clarification of what it means for things like sick pay, and making sure that people have the ability to get sick pay from day one. Flexible working, I think if we're in a situation as of probably Friday or next week where schools are closing, ensuring that managers are supporting those with kind of caring responsibilities, and not just children, those with kind of dependents who may be older, to adapt their schedules and work so that they can look after those people. And mental health is also the big aspect. A lot of us are going to be indoors for quite a long time. So are there things that employers and we at the CBI could be doing to ensure that staff are kind of putting mental health as a priority alongside physical health? So daily check-ins, taking regular breaks, going outside where you can for walks, so long as you're adhering to government advice, of course, and things like that, to ensure that that people are kind of looking after themselves as much as possible. On the economic impact, it's of course going to be quite significant. We already hear that certain sectors are facing particular challenges, like airlines, for instance. I think it's going to be a very evolving situation as we look to see what government support can do when that's in place, support to help businesses through those processes to get that support. So the government has already announced some support for that. Will there need to be more? We're going to have to, I think, wait and see how things develop. It's a lot of uncertainty, basically, at the moment we all have to deal with.
Oh, Karen, I don't think we can hear you.
Sorry. I think, for many businesses, any type of planning has always meant, let's make some assumptions about not being able to get into the building. Let's have some assumptions about my system not being down. And oh, by the way, what if people can't get into work? And I think this is really testing those assumptions that might have once been made. And I think it's going to change the way that we think about how work is done. The idea in terms of, I think that we're going to see some really difficult decisions having to be made. And I'm hoping that we come out of it on the other side, maybe having a little bit of a different think about what our communities are, what the business world is, who the stakeholders really are for organizations. And maybe we all can take a little bit of a deeper breath as we're thinking about career paths in organizations and what we need to be delivering.
Great. Thank you both so much for that. And in terms of visibility and promotion, a lot of people, wonder how can they increase their visibility at work and make sure their sort of contribution is appreciated. Do either of you have any tips or reflections on this?
If you don't mind, I do a bit. I think it's important to be able to sometimes say I and not we. I think that it's too easy to say we, which sometimes means it's not always clear what the contribution is that's being made or the recognition. I think it's important to be able to do a good job. You've got to have the fundamentals that are there. But I think it's also good sometimes maybe to take some risks. again, I talked about sort of having the courage of your convictions, testing your convictions, challenging them, and then really trying to drive them and work them through, maybe trying to own them as well. And it doesn't have to be done perfectly, but it gets things started. And I've seen that a lot, people who can actually drive things because they're more comfortable with a bit of what they need to do rather than trying to wait or be too reticent. And I think that's why I'm trying to increase your profile, and also trying to understand what is it that actually somebody else needs to be able to make them succeed if you're going to be sort of part of their ongoing team.
Great. Katie, did you have anything to add, or I'm happy to go on to the next question?
I share that view on the I rather than we point. That's something I also wrote down. Something personally that I've benefited from is having a sponsor in the workplace. So I don't think I would have got some of the opportunities I've had at CBI if it wasn't for either my manager or my manager's manager really advocating for me in the business, and they were doing that without even me realizing that. So I think if you are able to have a sponsor in the workplace, I do think it's valuable. It doesn't need to be someone super senior, but it needs to be someone who could also have visibility in the organization and to be your champion when you're not in the room.
That's great. And Karen, you mentioned a point there about risk taking. I suppose, can you give any guidance around what you think is sort of a smart career decision versus, something that might damage your career or your reputation? How do you think about making a sort of good calculated risk?
I like to look at things by seeing what doors I'm closing and what opportunities I'm creating with the decision that I'm making, and being comfortable with that. And I think you also maintain your integrity and your reputation for what it is that you can deliver, whether it's on time, critical thinking, but basically the consistency of what you want to be able to build for your reputation, I think. Sorry, I didn't really answer that quite properly, but I think the main one is really looking at the opportunities that you actually can have by taking that risk. And maybe thinking a bit about the worst case scenario too, bracketing things. Not everything's going to be sort of on this upward trajectory without a lot of bumps along the way, but having given it a little bit of thought, I think it becomes easier to sort of endure them than if you're not thinking that way.
Great. And Katie, I was wondering, how does someone go about finding a great sponsor? Oh, Katie, I don't think we can hear you.
Sorry, I had myself on mute. So one thing I actually heard at an event, and it was an Accenture event actually for their International Women's Day, was there's a difference between having a sponsor, a mentor, and a coach. And I think ensuring that you have people in each category is useful. So in terms of a sponsor, something they said was you can't really ask for a sponsor. A sponsor kind of knows who you are. They take an interest in your career. How that comes about is unknown, but I kind of identify with what they said about that. I didn't really had to ask for a sponsor. I felt doing my job well helped with that, and it was recognized, and then they took an interest in my career once they took an interest in my work. However, I feel a mentor is just as important as a sponsor, and for that I did seek someone out and I did ask them, and it's important when you are choosing a mentor that you are choosing them, that you know why you're choosing them, what qualities that they have, what gaps do they feel in your career that's missing and that can help you. And then for a coach, I'm currently going through the process of getting a coach via my workplace. And with that was very much around having a personal development plan and identifying specifically what help I need a coach to support me on. And I've identified managing up as one area where I would like some coaching support. just to work on a specific issue. And that's a short-term thing. It doesn't have to be a long-term thing like a mentorship or a partner. And that's to help me over a specified period of time. So I think that's a good way of thinking about it.
Great. And both of you have held very impressive leadership roles. So I'm wondering for the audience, what are your views on sort of managing your career with regards to pursuing promotions?
I think being vocal and having the opportunity to express about what it is you want to be able to achieve. And I think what Katie said, finding out what it is you might need to fill in some of those gaps, but also being able to articulate what it is you're hoping to get from your career or from your next job or from your next role. I often said over the year, in my first few years on Wall Street, that I was very happy to go overseas. I'd be very happy to do that. And probably at some point someone was listening because the opportunities came up for the roles that they needed. And I think I'd agree with Katie, you don't always really know where your sponsors are. And part of that is the ability to, I think, continue is to be able to be delivering good work and sort of making sure a broad group of people are aware of that.
I would just echo everything that Karen just said, and again from personal experience where I perhaps didn't progress, I kind of knew the reason why, in the sense I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to get from that role, or what I saw myself doing in that role in terms of my plan for that once I got put in place. And I think that really came through when it came to the interview process, for instance. And for me, I think authenticity and purpose, as Karen was saying in the beginning, what your values are, and is very, very important. And I think that really shines through, because when you are passionate of something and you feel your integrity is tied to that, I do think you excel and are more productive, etc. So that would be my view.
It's great. So we've got a few questions around the topic of resilience. So both of you are in, roles where, you're sort of very visible, I'm sure, internally and externally as well. So that may come with some pressures and some stresses. So I'm supposing, how do you manage, some of the pressures and the stresses that you've been under at work?
With a bit of humor,
Yeah.
a bit of self-deprecation, of trying to maybe take the long-term view, which isn't always easy. I think probably those are it for me.
Yeah, humor helps. And yeah, I think I wouldn't say managing is kind of the same as being successful at coping with it. I think that there are good and bad days, I think is important to stress. And like exercise definitely helps me, and having a semblance of a routine, which is not happening at the moment because I'm at home, but trying to adapt if I am I guess situation changes. So for example, I'm really big into yoga at the moment. I'm not able to go to a class, so I'm now watching YouTube videos and trying to do it at home to some success. And from a mental point of view, I think who you surround yourself with personally is very important. Your friends, your family, having your networks such as this, I think, is a good forum to share kind of stress and seek solutions and help, and all those sorts of things.
Could I also add, I think also sometimes, I thrive more when there's a bit of chaos and things have to sort of be made sense of, but other people really need and value a routine, particularly some of the folks in the tech world that I've worked with. And I think when you're, in some ways, maybe it's being able to try to translate a bit of that chaos into something that actually is more comfortable for people to be working with. Because if everybody can sort of pitch in and help and work to their best, that actually takes a lot of the pressure off of, I think, the individual.
Great. And for both of you, what has been, one of your toughest days at work? Feel free to edit depending on the content. So
yeah.
I I remember it's probably my second or third year at the CBI. We were releasing a report at our big annual conference that we run every November. It's like over 1,000 people come. The PM comes, etc. It's a big deal, and we were working. It was probably like 8 p.m. at night, and I was just doing something. Not even a big deal. It was just a distribution list and an Excel spreadsheet, and I think someone, I won't say who they were, came and said, this is not the right approach for everything, which I'd been working on for 2 days. And he left the room, and I probably burst into tears, more so out of anger than it was. I was upset as well, but I was mostly angry. And he came into the room afterwards, and he did apologize, which I think his stress and his panic came onto myself, which was not great. And it was the first time I had the confidence to tell him that was not a good approach. That was not good. I may have used some choice words, which I would not recommend doing at all. And I don't know whether we had just got to a point in the relationship where I was just able to be that honest, or it was probably more confidence in myself, I would say. But it was a horrendous day. I continued to cry as I was finishing the distribution lists and everything. But yeah, got over it eventually.
I'll make mine a little more personal. Because when you talk about bad days, I can think about days where there was no liquidity in the market. I can think about some of these more difficult conversations that you've had, with people trying to change different views, feeling as if you're not quite delivering what you should be delivering. But I think for me, it was actually being away when things happened at home that you couldn't get back for. And that's part of the choices and part of the decisions that you make along the way. And also, I think those are also moments when you pause to make sure that what you're actually giving up to do what you're doing is actually worth it. Just maintaining that bit of a balance, because it's not always easy to sort of, and I think we might be seeing some of that now, where people won't be able to get to be where they want to be at times that are going to be really important. And maybe just being able to be comfortable, that's also going to be really important, I think, in the days ahead.
That's great. You're both clearly expert in managing very difficult situations. And hopefully there are lots of highs as well. So would you be able to share, some of the things that you've been really passionate about at work, or things that have motivated you?
I like being able to translate incomplete and complex ideas into things that people can understand and mitigate the risks that would happen if that didn't take place. And I think some of my proudest moments are when I've worked with teams, and one gentleman said that I gave him the wings to fly, because he felt that he was able to do things that he never thought he could. And I looked at him and said, well, why should I think you couldn't? So for me, the idea that you can be building the resiliency and the capacity of that people on your team and the folks that are going to have to take the baton at some point, those to me have been my successes.
Some quite similar ones, actually. Prior to this role, I was in an account management role where I looked after a portfolio of some of our largest clients at the CBI, and it's not a kind of particular moment, but just the ability to get that feedback from them that you have helped them with a situation within their business is quite rewarding, and especially if something that's made them better kind of meets their purpose and our purpose as a business. It's really it really kind of makes your day. And internally, also helping other particular junior colleagues with their careers, and particularly if colleagues have taken a step to realizing their career goals, I think for me personally is probably even more rewarding, in a sense that people are finding themselves at an earlier age than perhaps I did is quite nice to see and surreal at the same time.
That's great. And so who are your inspirations, people that you both look up to?
It's a big question. I don't know if I have a specific person I say is inspiring. I think even just listening to Karen, I'm just like, wow, it's sometimes when you're just at events or in a meeting, someone will say something or will just have one piece of advice that you kind of take with you, and there's probably kind of a collection of probably over 100 people over kind of the course of my career so far, where they just said something that stuck with me, and I'm able to remember the time and the place where they said it, and if I'm telling other people about what they said as well, I think that to me meets the criteria. Long list, basically, in short.
And I think that's really true. The idea that you take sort of the snippets or the best of what you hear and you figure out a way to incorporate it. I once heard a woman, and I apologize, I can't remember her name, but she said she's an opera singer, and she said she couldn't sing Puccini because she knew her voice wouldn't do it. If she sang Puccini, her voice would be damaged. And so she just kept it out of her repertoire. And I thought the same thing. Well, in business or in my career, there's probably things that I just don't want to do that are going to be damaging. And so we sort of take that away, that there's kind of shared experiences across the different industries. There's a gentleman, D. Hawk, who was one of the folks who started Visa, the credit card company, back a long time ago. And he really talks a lot about chaotic organizations. And there's another gentleman, E.O. Wilson, who writes about nature and biology, I think. But one of the comments that he made when I heard him speak, he said, "Go where the crowds are not." And I think some of those things are really good as we think now, what we want to be doing sort of in our careers, particularly in the environment that we find ourselves in. So whether they're the three top of the list, but they're the three that come to mind.
That's great. And so what advice would you give to your 21-year-old self?
You have no idea. It's going to be okay. I think that's what I would say.
Don't take out a credit card will be number one. Manage your finances from early on.
Yeah.
Don't wait till your late 20s to get a grip.
That's very, very solid advice. And both of you are great leaders. So I was wondering if you could share some tips on how does one become an effective leader?
I think you listen. I think you make sure that people are giving you honest information and honest feedback. My time in Germany, I learned I had to ask a lot of questions just to make sure that it was sort of pulling together the different ideas. And I think also sometimes maybe the people that are the first to answer and the loudest may not necessarily be the ones that are going to come to you with the information that's going to be the most helpful in terms of taking things forward. People who know what they're doing, they know their jobs well. And I think if you can actually draw that out whenever you're working with them, especially if you're working for change, I think you get a much more powerful solution. And I believe that wholeheartedly, that you really need to make sure that people are able to challenge, but then also you do agree that you're going to take whatever you agreed on and take that forward, agreeing that as things change, you'll maybe change your point of view as well, too.
Yeah, I completely agree with that again. And there's something around authenticity and being open and honest, even in the tough times, I think. Again, there's something that I heard from someone else around, good leaders will, when they are celebrating success, give the credit to their teams. And when there are tough times and there are failures, they take it upon themselves. So there's something around kind of being responsible and empowering and supporting others.
Yeah, and having their back as well. When people make a mistake, I think you have to be able to have their back and make sure that they're comfortable in what we've learned from making those mistakes.
That's great. And, a lot of people sort of are concerned that the rate of change in the workplace maybe isn't as quick as we might like. I suppose if you're thinking about maybe 2030, what would you hope that we had sort of changed about the workplace or made progress on?
Do you want to start with that, Katie?
Yeah, I think pay gaps closing or nearly closed would be great. It'll be interesting. I think one of the key challenges we probably face over the next 10 to 20 years is around the impact of technology on people's jobs and ways of working. It's definitely something that's a concern for people at the moment. So I think reskilling is something that we're going to have to look at as a country. So seeing people with more kind of digital skills or different skills and more flexible ways of working. I think perhaps one of the things that will come out of the current coronavirus crisis is around how we adapt to new ways of working, as Karen said, and find more innovative and maybe efficient and useful ways to do business.
And I would like to see maybe that in the next 10 years, we really do understand the value of bringing diversity of thought, diversity of learning into the workplace, so we are able to make them good places for a lot of people, but also probably be delivering a lot better because you're actually engaging a broad range of people who look at the world or the problem from different lenses. And I think it's really powerful when you can draw them out and be able to work together like that. I'm hoping that the differences can be respected and seen to be valued. Maybe that would be my dream.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. So happy to open it up for more questions. So if you do have a question, please type it in the chat and I will hopefully see it and read it out. Someone is typing. You have a question? So here's a question in the chat. What do you do if you don't get along with someone at work?
I think it's
like frenemies, apparently. Oh, complex.
Is it possible to find the shared goal that you have, even if you may have different ways of trying to achieve it, and assuming that it's not actually becoming personal, trying to work toward sort of a common interest?
Yeah, I agree with that. If it's affecting your work, I think it's important to focus on what is it you both care about, because then you align pretty quickly on that. I think, particularly if it's time sensitive. I think if it gets to a point where it's becoming more of a employment issue or HR issue, you might want to consider moderation. But I think that's in the most serious of cases. If it's a kind of frenemy situation where it's personally kind of don't see eye to eye, then keep things professional. We work in a workplace after all, and if you're not friends, then you're not friends. You all have lives outside of work. So.
I think we've got another question coming in the chat. Yep, someone is typing, so we wait in anticipation. So how do you manage the downside in the age of coronavirus? So sudden changes. So I think we spoke to that a little bit earlier on, but I suppose maybe we're thinking for people who are, perhaps self-employed or particularly vulnerable or in an emergency situation. I mean, do you have any tips for those people?
I think it'll be important to reach out to other people and not try to bear that yourself. Um, I, I think that will be important. I mean, downside implies, there's going to be economic downsides. There's probably going to be slower growth. There may be risks of losing jobs. There may be things that you find or think of that actually have a new need. But I think don't be discouraged. I think none of us really know how we're going to sort of be managing our own resilience in the days ahead. And I think it's going to be really important that we have the communities that we've built or we continue to develop. That's going to be really important. It's not an easy answer. It's not a thorough answer, but I think there really are no answers at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you are concerned, particularly from an employment angle, do seek information where you can, whether that is from government, your local council, from any kind of, if you've got business with clients at the moment, just get the information to assess kind of where you are at the moment. I think if you're concerned about future impacts, I think maybe kind of write down areas where you do have concerns. I think the priority right now is really around keeping each other and yourself safe, physically and mentally, and then just kind of list some action points and timelines. This is very the rational economist in me saying kind of plan, but just realize we are in uncertain times and things may shift, as Karen alluded to, but also make sure you're looking after yourself first and foremost. So.
And if you do have time, in terms of things changing suddenly, I was thinking about this, that, so much right now, there's so much more information that's available to be able to learn something new or to be able to understand a new area. But between YouTube, there's people who do webinars. So I think in terms of being able to think about your skill set and what it is that you bring to whatever it is the next step or the next phase will be, if you have the time, if you've got the capacity, that's another way to be able to spend time to continue personal growth and maybe also find the different areas where you will have a community of shared interests.
Great. And I've thought of another question, actually. So I think both of you are board members or advisors to organizations as well. Is that correct? So how do you manage that role, and what's the big difference compared to your executive experience? What should somebody think about if they're, taking up a board or an advisor role?
I think it's the personal risk for some of the board roles, I think, are things to be considering. I think being able to be a sounding board for the folks who have the ideas and the drive, and being able to maybe challenge gently or contribute to their thinking is a really interesting and exciting place to be.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's you are undertaking legal responsibilities by sitting on a board, so I think that's something to be mindful of. It is a serious undertaking. It's a really valuable experience. I am learning so much sitting on the board of Black Cultural Archives. I think it's also key to know the strengths and skill set you are bringing to the board, and realize that people have been appointed for different skill sets in an ideal world to ensure there is diversity of thought. So you might feel you are lacking in some skill sets compared to other board members, but that is also an opportunity to learn. And in time, you do become rounded in various issues, but you have to trust in yourself that you have been appointed for a reason and they saw something in you. because that's definitely something I went through when I went to the first board meeting, and second one I thought, oh, it's a bit overwhelming. But it's a really valuable experience. I would encourage anyone to do it.
Amazing. I have another one. And what makes you optimistic for the future? I'm assuming you are optimistic.
You know, I think there's still opportunities. Again, things aren't always in a straight trajectory. Things don't always go according to plan. Oftentimes being able to bounce back or be able to have, I think, you know, it's pain. Sometimes it can be painful and it's not easy and you can be full of self-doubt. But at the other end, I think there's still opportunities, you know, to grow and just to be able to contribute and to have a little bit of fun. I mean, we have to be thinking that way.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with that. And I think in my role, what's quite exciting is seeing businesses step up to help solve kind of genuine problems in society. I mean, there are problems in society, they're all genuine, but it's exciting to hear how businesses are using their technology or not just to do their day-to-day business, but to solve like grand challenges that they're facing. So whether that's using their satellites to help with assessing the needs for around humanitarian disasters, or even down to ensuring that classrooms are painted certain colours that inspire learning in schools. And it's just, I find that quite encouraging to see businesses moving to that and thinking a lot more around their kind of community impacts and doing social good. And most of them are already, it's just we're not hearing enough about it and showing best practice. And I get to see that in my role, and that keeps me quite optimistic.
Fantastic. And I think there is another question in the chat. So is CBI measuring the business response to humanitarian issues?
I wouldn't say we're measuring. I think when you get into a subject like measuring, there's so many sub-questions, like what framework are you using to measure against, and who decides whether that framework is the right framework. And if you're, for example, multinational company and you operate in over 100 countries and you have one specific framework for the UK and another country has another, and how our businesses wasting time focusing on kind of complying with all these different frameworks rather than just doing the work. So I guess in terms of measuring, no. Some of that's just down to capacity as well as a business, and we are kind of SME by default. I think where we are trying to encourage our businesses to take action is identifying where they can make a difference, which is essentially my job, so to speak. So there'll only be some companies that can help with kind of large humanitarian issues. There'll be others who might focus on making an impact in their local community, and that might just be through something like, I say just, it's very significant, local engagement with schools to help kids identify where they can develop skills and careers in the future, because careers advice is of varying quality in this country. So things like that. And I think we need to be mindful that the business community is very diverse. SMEs make up, and mid-sized businesses make up the chunk of businesses in the country. So things need to be kind of within their grasp in a sense.
Fantastic. So I think we're nearly at the top of the hour, and we've had great engagement in the chat as well. So I think all that's left for me to do is to thank you, Karen and Katie, for being fantastic guests and panelists tonight.